Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a stack of sources that offer a truly profound look at the early life and political awakening of one of history's most transformative figures.
That's right. And the material our listener shared, it really zeroes in specifically on those foundational years. Gives us a unique window, doesn't it?
It really does, into the influences, the experiences, those pivotal moments that shaped his path long before, the world knew him as this global icon of freedom.
So our mission today is to pull out the most compelling insights from these documents,
Yep.
help you understand the complex world he grew up in.
And the precise steps, that drew him into the heart of the struggle for freedom in South Africa.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We've got sources covering, well, everything from his traditional tribal roots, early education.
To facing that raw prejudice, getting into law.
Right, and witnessing the very beginnings of organized resistance under the shadow of apartheid. It's quite a journey.
From the rural Transkei to bustling Johannesburg.
Exactly. So, let's begin at Pikazwini. That's where his early life was really shaped. The sources point to two dominant forces there.
Chieftaincy and the church.
Right. And they describe this fascinating, uneasy harmony between them.
Uneasy harmony, I like that.
Yeah. And what stands out is how Christianity wasn't just abstract for him. It was embodied by people like Reverend Mediolo.
His spiritual authority seemed immense.
It really did. The sources suggest it almost superseded the regent's worldly power sometimes. The young man was, well, deeply impressed.
And the church's influence wasn't just about faith, was it? The sources show it was tied to progress, too.
Absolutely. The material makes it clear. Missionary work, particularly through schools, was seen as the path to advancement.
So mission schools were training people for what were considered the best jobs then.
That's right. Clerks, interpreters, policemen. These roles were seen as, the height of aspiration. It directly linked worldly success to the church.
Okay, shifting slightly. The sources also give us this window into traditional Thembu democracy, which wasn't like the majority rule system we often think of.
Not at all. What we learn is that these meetings, they were structured so all men who attended were heard. The goal wasn't a simple vote count.
Which the sources say was seen as foreign.
Exactly. It was about reaching consensus.
Mhm.
Even if that meant agreeing to disagree, that was still seen as a kind of unanimity. The core idea was that a minority shouldn't be crushed by the majority.
And the regent's role in all this, it was quite specific.
Very. It's a powerful leadership model described. He listened patiently, right through criticism, showing no outward emotion.
And only spoke at the end.
Only at the very end of the day, sunsetting, after everyone else had their say. That practice of deep listening before speaking feels like a crucial lesson.
Embedded right in the culture.
Yeah. And keeping history alive was part of this world, too, through the elders.
The storytellers.
Exactly. Regaling gatherings with tales of African patriots, those who stood against Western domination. Chief Zwelithangel Joy is mentioned specifically.
A living historian.
That's how he's described. His accounts of resistance really fired up the imaginations of the young listeners. You could see how those stories planted seeds early on. Pride, defiance.
This traditional world then led to a really significant rite of passage, the circumcision school.
The sources describe this experience as shedding the last remnant of childhood, a period of intense preparation.
Both physical and spiritual.
Right. Healing physically in these seclusion huts, 13 men packed into each one, apparently, and undertaking what's called a spiritual preparation for manhood.
And that reemergence ceremony sounds deeply symbolic.
It is. After seclusion, covered in white ochre, they'd wash it off in the Embash River, then get coated in red ochre.
And there's a detail about how the pigment was removed.
Yeah, the sources note a tradition that a woman often rubbed it off, but in his specific case, it was done with fat and lard. Interesting detail.
And the burning of the lodges?
That symbolized leaving the world of childhood pleasures behind. In the ashes, there was this immediate, powerful feeling of being a man.
But he reflected later.
Exactly. He reflected later that true manhood, the kind with deep responsibility and resilience, that took many more years to really grow into.
So from the village and this rite of passage, his journey takes him into formal education. First stop, Clarkbury, a Thembu college.
And he arrives there expecting, well, maybe some deference because of his lineage.
But that wasn't the case.
No, he was, as the sources put it, painfully mistaken, treated just like everyone else, which forced him to face a new reality.
And yielded an important insight, right?
Definitely. He quickly learned that success there, it depended entirely on his own ability, not his background, not his heritage.
Had to compete.
Had to compete, yeah. With classmates who were sometimes better prepared, it pushed him.
Then came Heeltown, another mission school, and here a different model of aspiration was presented.
Yeah, here the ideal held up was the educated Englishman. The goal, sometimes said sort of derisively, was to become black Englishmen.
And figures like Dr. Wellington pushed this.
Right, emphasizing his connection to the Duke of Wellington, reinforcing ideas of British superiority. That was the cultural model being promoted.
There's a vivid anecdote in the sources about student dynamics there, involving someone named Rex Tatane.
Ah, yes. Tatane, who was apparently very skilled in English, openly mocked Mandela and other newcomers.
Called him a backward fellow from the countryside.
Exactly. Said he couldn't even speak English properly.
Yeah.
Mimicked his accent, apparently. This kind of snobbery based on language.
You'd think it would be discouraging.
But the sources say it wasn't. Instead, it actually strengthened the resolve of the newcomers, the freshers. It fueled their determination to prove themselves. Interesting reaction.
This whole education journey eventually leads him to the city, to Johannesburg, Igoli.
City of Gold. The sources really capture the sense of excitement, anticipation around this move.
A place of dreams and danger.
Both. Opportunity and temptation. It lived up to those childhood stories, apparently. Tall buildings, chaotic crowds, cars everywhere, even dashing gangsters.
But his initial path in the city, it took an unexpected turn.
It did. Initially, that connection back to the region, it seemed to offer an entry point. Through mining officials.
Who treated chiefs with deference.
Yes, because they needed them as labor recruiters.
Yes.
He actually got special treatment at first. Free housing, rations, a salary.
But that didn't last.
No. Ended very abruptly. The sources recount this telegram arriving from the region. Send boys home at once.
Wow. How did he react?
He describes profound shame, humiliation, being ordered back like that, but also this immediate, fierce determination not to go back, not to return to the Transkei.
So he had to find his own way.
Absolutely. He sought help from Dr. A.B. Huma, a key figure in the city, and Zuma helped him get a position as an articled clerk.
An apprentice lawyer.
Essentially, yes. At the firm Witkin, Sadelsky, and Eidelman, which was notable because it served both black and white clients.
And this set him on the path to becoming an attorney.
Correct. Meant completing a BA degree through correspondence with UNISA, the University of South Africa, while doing those articles. A lot of work.
And it was also around this time he got his first real exposure to organized political thought, attending Communist Party meetings.
Yes, though he describes attending mostly out of intellectual curiosity. At that point, the sources say his view of the struggle in South Africa was purely racial.
So the party's perspective, the class struggle lens.
He found it intriguing, the haves versus have-nots idea. But he didn't initially see it as, well, particularly relevant to the specific dynamics of South Africa right then. He was absorbing ideas, but racial injustice was his primary frame.
And alongside all this career politics, he faced very personal challenges too. Prejudice, even within his relationships.
Yeah, the sources detail the tribal prejudice he encountered regarding his relationship with Ellen, who was Swazi. Others, including a friend and even the Reverend's wife, Mrs. Mabutho, disapproved purely on tribal grounds.
And Mrs. Mabutho used a derogatory term.
She did, Shangaan, which is actually the name of a proud tribe, but it shows how tribalism was used divisively.
And his response is revealing.
He rejected it completely, insisted Ellen was Swazi, stood firm in his love and respect for her, refused to let others' narrow views dictate his life. It feels like a significant moment, that personal stand against tribalism.
Like a microcosm of the larger unity he'd later champion.
Exactly. And all these personal experiences were playing out against this huge shift in South African society.
The 1948 nationalist election, apartheid.
Changed everything, didn't it? He describes apartheid as this crazy concept born of prejudice and fear, one that inevitably brought tension, strife.
And Millen's declaration.
Chilling. South Africa belongs to us once more. It signaled the arrival of this stark discriminatory system.
And this new reality spurred organized resistance. The sources highlight the Youth League's response in 1949.
A powerful response. They issued this clear rallying cry for patriotic youth to actively work to overthrow white domination.
And importantly, they pushed back against the Communist Party's emphasis.
Explicitly, they rejected the idea that economic oppression was the primary issue.
Their focus was squarely on racial oppression.
Precisely. They stressed the fundamental need for a powerful national liberation movement rooted in African nationalism, led by Africans.
And they had concrete demands.
Yes, Central planks were the redivision of land more equitable and the complete abolition of the pass laws.
Those hated internal passports.
Exactly. Severely restricting black South Africans' lives and movement.
Early protests followed this, like the May 1st strike.
Yeah, despite the government banning meetings, the strike saw huge participation. Over two-thirds of African workers stayed home.
And the response?
That night, the sources recount, police fired on an orderly march, resulting in deaths, injuries. It's characterized as an indiscriminate and unprovoked attack, a brutal escalation.
This escalating conflict, government repression, it really set the stage for a pivotal moment, the Defiance Campaign.
Absolutely. The sources describe the Day of the Volunteers rally in Durban, June 1952, as a key event.
He was the main speaker there.
Yes, before 10,000 people. An experience he described as exhilarating, really put him on a larger public stage.
And the strategy behind the campaign itself was quite deliberate, wasn't it?
Ingenious, really, in its simplicity and reach. They selected 6 particularly oppressive laws to deliberately break.
Not expecting them to be overturned immediately.
No, the goal wasn't naive hope. It was about engaging the largest possible number of ordinary people. Through nonviolent mass action, widespread participation was key.
And the impact on the ANC organization.
Oh, fundamental, transformative. The sources emphasize it changed the ANC from being seen as more talk than action into this dynamic force.
Membership's urge
Exploded,
Yeah.
jumped from a smaller base to 100,000, made it a genuinely mass-based movement. And it built this large group of activists with direct experience confronting the system.
facing police, courts, prison.
Exactly, which leads to maybe one of the most profound achievements of the campaign, according to sources.
Which was,
changing the perception of imprisonment itself.
how so?
It removed the stigma, the shame usually associated with being jailed for political acts. Going to prison for defying unjust laws became a badge of honor among Africans.
That's a huge psychological shift.
Crucial. Overcoming that fear of state reprisal is essential for any liberation struggle. It empowered people by flipping the narrative around punishment.
There's a specific anecdote about an Adderall demonstration that captures the spirit.
It really does. Highlights the discipline, the determination. Volunteers, African and Indian, arrive at the township gates. Police have locked them.
And they just waited.
Patiently waited, demanding entry. Hundreds watching, spectators, journalists. Walter Susulu was there leading from the front, but the sources single out Nanasita.
Despite his arthritis.
Yes. Moving among the demonstrators, encouraging patience, resolve. It shows that quiet strength, that widespread commitment behind the public defiance.
And throughout this period, he's also navigating his legal career, which offered its own stark education about justice under apartheid.
Yeah, the sources are very blunt about the prejudice he faced as a black attorney. Policemen refusing to answer him in court.
Magistrates demanding to see his certificate in court.
Right, just to humiliate him. A clear violation of practice. He was routinely subjected to racial insults, too, like being called a Kafir lawyer.
And this whole experience, it fundamentally reshaped how he saw the law itself.
Completely. As a student, he had this idealistic view of the law as a sort of justice. Equal for everyone. That's what law school taught.
But the reality was different.
Very different. His practical experience in those courtrooms. He came to see the law primarily as a tool used by the ruling class, used to shape society, to benefit them, to maintain oppression.
Though he did acknowledge.
He did acknowledge that sometimes justice was received, particularly from enlightened judges. But the overwhelming experience was that the system was rigged against black people.
So building on the Defiance Campaign's momentum, the growing political consciousness, the idea for the Freedom Charter emerges.
This was a truly remarkable effort described in the sources, really grassroots, to gather the demands, the aspirations of people all across the country.
Using flyers with simple questions.
Simple but profound questions, yeah. Like, if you could make the laws, what would you do? And how would you set about making South Africa a happy place for all the people who live in it? And the language of the flyers themselves was almost poetic, idealistic, calling on everyone, black and white, to speak together about freedom.
To record their visions.
Exactly. Into a great charter of freedom.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. These sources, they don't just list events. They show this incredible journey, don't they? From that traditional village life, steeped in these layered influences, chieftaincy, church,
Through formal education that kind of shattered assumptions about heritage.
to the stark realities of city life, the raw prejudice he faced daily. in his personal life, in the courtroom.
And you see so clearly how personal experience wasn't separate from his political awakening. They were deeply intertwined, fueling his understanding of injustice.
So, what does this all really mean, looking back at these foundational years?
Well, I think it powerfully underscores that the path to becoming a revolutionary leader like him,
Hmm.
it wasn't simple, not linear, not just a reaction to oppression.
It was forged through all these diverse influences.
Exactly. Absorbing lessons in consensus from Thembu democracy, learning he had to succeed on merit in school, confronting prejudice head-on, seeing the law used as a weapon, all these seemingly separate parts of his early life converged.
Building a leader who understood that his own freedom was tied to everyone else's.
Inextricably linked to the freedom of his entire people. His personal struggles mirrored the collective struggle.
Which does raise a fascinating question for you, listening. How do the values and lessons learned in these different parts of a life, traditional governance, religion, academic challenges, city life, facing injustice, how do they all come together?
How do they manifest in a public figure leading a national movement? It really makes you wonder about those unseen foundations, doesn't it? The things that truly shape the leaders who change